Made by a team of only 12 people and in only 5 months, Infinity Blade upon its release would become the fastest grossing iOS app of all time, making $1.6 million upon its release, with it making a total of $23 million approximately a year after its release. It was unprecedented at the time, and yet nowadays, the IP has been almost forgotten, with the games not even able to be downloaded on mobile devices anymore. So that begs the question, what the hell happened? The year is 2010. Troll faces making a way around the internet community, slurs that haven't even been invented yet are being spewed in Modern Warfare 2 lobbies, and most importantly, I would attempt to start my first ever YouTube channel.
Types of geckos, because if you've ever seen Geico commercials, well, these are the type of gecko that Geico gecko is.
Life was good. On a June afternoon, a call would be placed by the Fortnite guys, Epic Games. Epic at the time was most well known for their game development engine, Unreal, and they had just made a new breakthrough with this engine. For this reason, they called the heads of one of their newly acquired companies, Chair Entertainment. They had a pitch. Well, less a pitch and more a demand. Epic had finished working on a modified version of Unreal Engine 3, which was able to run on iOS devices, and they wanted Chair Entertainment to make a game to be presented as a true showcase for what this engine could accomplish in only 5 months, to be presented later that year. And they also needed a playable demo of said game in less than 2 months for Apple's fall event in September of that year. Chair, for that reason, immediately began to work, having little time to spare. Brainstorming immediately began, and they had eventually settled on the concept of a sword fighting game they had originally thought of developing for Xbox's Kinect, going with the name of Project Sword for the time. With the basic concept down, the first week of their 8-week mad dash would be spent figuring out all aspects of the game's combat and gameplay before coding even started. They knew that mobile games targeted a different demographic of players, and fundamentally required a different gameplay style. Mobile game players' attention spans were short, and mobile devices really didn't leave a lot of room for inputs for buttons or other controls. In the heavily paraphrased words of two of Chair's founders, Donald and Jeremy Mustard, mobile gamers love to play games on their toilet, and they wanted to make a game that allowed for a peak toilet gaming experience. For this reason, they settled on the idea that most fights in the game would last a minute, maybe 2-3 minutes at most, to complement the pick-up, put-down playstyle seen for mobile games. And from there, they knew that fundamentally the game's combat would center on swipe controls, allowing for not only ease of use for the user, but an in-depth fighting style usually impossible to accomplish for combat in traditional controller-based sword fighting games. They had a lot of ideas that they wanted to implement for the game, but to make it easier on themselves with a time restriction, they would cut approximately 2/3 of their initial ideas, and from there, they'd established the idea of developing an on-rails, quick action ARPG with fairly basic controls. But this would be easier said than done. Despite 2 well-received games made for Xbox Live Arcade, Chair had never developed a mobile game before, which presented a whole new challenge for the team. This was not at all helped by the fact that they were working with a still not yet refined mobile version of Unreal Engine 3, which would break and cause issues for them almost daily. But they had to work around what they had, because in all honesty, they didn't really have time to stop. Within 2 weeks, the team had developed the parry, block, and dodge mechanics for the game, using either cubes or circles for the models, or ripping models from one of their previous games, Shadow Complex. And from there, the next few weeks would be spent brutally attempting to refine every aspect of the game to live up to the perfectionism pushed by Steve Jobs and Apple at the time. Speaking of Apple, the plan for this event was for Steve Jobs to personally reveal the launch of Game Center, a social platform that advertised as seamlessly allowing you to invite your friends to instances for all types of multiplayer functionality, and right alongside the announcement would be the unveiling of Project Sword. For this reason, Chair also had the difficult task of implementing Game Center into their single-player game before the sneak peek at the show. The remaining few weeks would be spent figuring out how this matchmaking functionality, even if it was not planned for the game on release, would work, as well as replacing the polygons and reused assets in their game with its very own art. When discussing inspirations for the game, co-founder Donald Mustard stated that the combat was inspired most by games like Prince of Persia and Karateka, but visually the team aimed to make a game that resembled the forlorn look of the beloved Shadow of the Colossus. So in the final few weeks, the team would work to fill out the basic environment for the player to walk around in, a simple model for the player and an enemy, and of course, at Apple's request, Game Center integration. And as August came to an end, the team anxiously waited to showcase what they'd worked on at the event the next day on September 1st.
It's my great pleasure to invite on stage Mike Capps, the president of Epic Games, to show us this amazing new game using Game Center.
To demonstrate, I want you to meet Donald Mustard, our creative director. Donald?
Hi, everyone. Today we're introducing a new game currently in development. It's codenamed Project Sword.
Based on the trailer, we would see ideas that would change from the final release of the game, such as a level system, the ability to freely walk around and move your character, as well as the PvP system, which although would not be there on release, would eventually show back up in later updates. But from this event, Chair knew they had a success on their hands. Feedback was not only positive from the public, but Steve Jobs as well was extremely positive, and it was this that would push the team through their last 3 months of development, finalizing level design, adding additional enemies and attack patterns, as well as further optimization for the game as they tackled the continuing issues of the still developing mobile version of Unreal Engine 3. But finally, after months of hard work, Project Sword, now officially known as Infinity Blade, would be released on December 9th, 2010, and much like the feedback from the reveal at the Apple Fall event, the release of the game would see as much praise, quickly pushing it to the top of the charts on the App Store, making $1.6 million in its first 4 days, making it the fastest grossing app ever released on iOS at the time. From here, Epic was able to truly see the potential this franchise held, and as the new year approached, Chair would work hard to release a free update to the game, adding in an additional enemy type, more loot, and microtransactions, which, kind of suck, but it's a mobile game, I guess. What are you gonna do? Entering the new year, the momentum of Chair's development would stay strong as they worked on pushing out even more free updates for the game. One thing after another. March, they drop a new update. Shit is crazy. New equipment, new enemies, new gameplay pathing. May, bam, another update. Not one versus mode they showed off in the Apple debut. Well, that's here now. Cool, I guess. But even more equipment. And then, for a moment, silence. Summer passes. Things start dying. My allergies get worse. Then October. Bam, 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 bam! Another free update for the game, adding in some new equipment and enemy types. An arcade release for Infinity Blade on a big-ass touchscreen, which you would commonly see in Dave & Buster's. Renowned fantasy writer Brandon Sanderson makes a book for Infinity Blade, I guess. That's pretty cool. Infinity Blade 2 is announced. And as the hype continued to boil over, not long after its announcement, early December of 2011 would see the release of Infinity Blade 2. And this shit was banging. Upon its release, much like its predecessor, it was praised by critics. Infinity Blade 2 was just more Infinity Blade, taking what the first game did and building even more off of its foundational design elements. New enemies, a huge world, offering both the dual-wielding and two-handing as weapon options alongside with the sword and shield from the first game. Super attacks, they added super attacks. New Game Plus, that's pretty cool, and gems. Yeah, they added a lot of stuff, and they weren't stopping there. May 24th of the following year would see the release of version 1.2 of the game, The Vault of Tears, which featured The Vault of Tears, as well as some more equipment items, etc., just more. And only a few months later, we would see another free update in August, Sky Cages, which featured Sky Cages. Who'da thunk it? New weapons, new equipment, new areas, 3 new boss battles as well, just overall great shit. And for a while, almost a year, Chair Entertainment kinda just kept their heads down, while a newly formed studio owned by Epic and Possible Studios had taken the reins of a new Infinity Blade game, a top-down isometric action RPG which served as a prequel to the original Infinity Blade Dungeons. After its announcement at GDC 2012 by Epic, the Impossible Studios team would work on the promising concept of an ARPG set in the Infinity Blade universe, and with a release date of 2013, things were looking exciting, and as 2013 rolled around, it got cancelled. Probably some development problems, but yeah, short-lived game. But don't worry, Chair was working on a game that would actually release, which would finally be announced on September 10th of 2013. The epic conclusion to the award-winning series with a thrilling story of honor, love, betrayal, and redemption, Infinity Blade 3. The trailer featured a very heavy story-based trailer with some emotional opera music that went like this.
Who I was.
With a monologue in the background, but it would also show off some of the new features of the game, including the ability to play as a new character, as well as some of the new enemies and zones for the game, with it most importantly including the release date for the game, only 8 days later on September 18th. And after its release, Infinity Blade 3 received just about as much positive reaction as the previous games in the series. They added a new playable character, Isa, I don't know how to say it, a more magic-focused character. There was skill paths for each stat, a much larger world with a greater emphasis on the story, which was further aided by another Brandon Sanderson book that was released around a month prior, and finally, everyone's favorite, a time-gated blacksmithing system where you could spend premium currency to expedite this process. But I've heard most of the time this wasn't really needed, and that doing quests gave you this currency, but people were definitely mildly annoyed at this addition to the game. Overall, though, reception was great, and people seemed to view it as a nice send-off for the series, with it getting its final expansion, Kingdom Come, on September 4th, 2014, marking the last known sighting of development on the Infinity Blade franchise. And honestly, we could end the story here, with Infinity Blade going down as a fond memory and beloved game. But 4 years after its last breath, in 2018, we'd get some terrible news. Infinity Blade was gone. On December 10th, Epic Games removed all 3 of the Infinity Blade games from their App Store, citing concerns that they weren't able to constantly update the game to be compatible with the continuously changing Apple software and hardware, which caused the games to not really run the greatest with the latest iOS updates. And although Epic could have had Chair focus on keeping the game optimized, it really wasn't profitable to do so, and Chair was focused on their new project at the time, Spyjinx. For this reason, Epic made the decision to remove it from their App Store as to not sell a broken product, which although is definitely disappointing, was somewhat understandable, and thankfully, if you had previously bought the games, you could still download them. They just didn't want to put the time and money to keep the games properly updated, especially when they were heavily focused on their new cash cow, Fortnite. And although this was disappointing again for many fans, a lot of people who had already liked Infinity Blade had already purchased the game, so it wasn't really a huge issue. But unfortunately, this would change 2 years later, when Apple would come after Epic after it had been provoked. Google would too, but Infinity Blade was never available on Android, so not as important here. The conflict would begin on August 13th, 2020. Todd Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games, had beef with the mobile market. He had been a loud critic even years before this event that mobile platforms took too large of a cut of mobile game companies' revenue, arguing that the forced use of the App Store and Play Store on smart devices essentially served as a monopoly on those platforms. This was all during a time where both Apple and Google were being investigated both in the US and EU for breaking antitrust laws. For this reason, Sweeney decided to go to war, initiating Project Liberty, which was not at all corny. Essentially, Project Liberty was a multi-step plan to challenge both Apple and Google legally as a further attack on their monopolistic practices. The first shot in Project Liberty would take place on the aforementioned August 13th, where a battle royale would truly begin in Fortnite. On this date, Epic rolled out a new patch to Fortnite on mobile devices that encouraged users to purchase V-Bucks externally on Epic Games' website instead of using the app or Play Store to purchase these microtransactions. This was done to get around the 30% that both Apple and Google were taking whenever you would purchase V-Bucks in Fortnite on mobile. Upon doing this, Apple and Google both immediately flipped their shit, citing a breach of their terms of service, removing all Epic Game products from both of their stores, banning them from their platforms, taking Fortnite and of course the Infinity Blade franchise with it, meaning users could no longer download the games even if they had previously been purchased. Epic would fire back quickly, filing lawsuits against both companies and releasing a Fortnite cinematic that used Fortnite assets to reenact an old commercial that was a reference to 1984. And so, we were fucked. The two cases were eventually settled, with Epic mainly taking the L. On the Apple case, although winning 1 out of the 10 counts against Apple, which now prevented them from blocking developers from being able to link to other store options inside applications, which was essentially why Epic had been banned in the first place. On the other hand, Google lost its case against Epic, having ruled that the Google Play Store was monopolistic, which for someone who doesn't understand legal stuff is fairly confusing, but essentially either way at the end of the day, we still don't have Infinity Blade available to purchase or download by any official or legal means. This essentially makes Infinity Blade almost unplayable for most people, and although there is a way to sideload it on mobile devices, it's incredibly disappointing that this is the case. Infinity Blade was a monumental game for the mobile market. Both its initial revenue and its graphics for the time were astounding. Losing such a valuable piece of history is kind of infuriating as someone who purchased this myself back in the day, which leads into the greater issue of not truly owning your games. It has been a fairly relevant topic recently, but I'll save that video for another day. Unfortunately, the legacy of Infinity Blade leaves behind a fairly sour taste in one's mouth, but not because of anything the games did, but because of the business operations surrounding it. Although Infinity Blade will likely continue to be forgotten as time goes on, I'm sure some people such as myself will always hold some special memories of how great this game truly was. Thank you all for watching this month's video. It was something that my friends, funnily enough, had pestered me to do for a good few months now, so I hope you're very happy. Nathan, Trevor, thank you. And, of course, thank you, as always, to this month's patrons. Mads, Dave the Unknown, Griff, Einar Anderson, Turmeric, Maddie Grady, The Commenting Cat, and Zarl Duncan. Your support helps to keep this channel running very comfortably off its ventilator, so you're truly a lifesaver. Thank you again as well to everyone else for watching. If you feel like trying to, there are some unofficial ways to be able to play Infinity Blade again, but legally I cannot recommend that you use them, but they are there. And with that clarification out of the way, I hope to see you all in the next one, and of course, take care.